Good morning, everybody. It's a rainy Sunday, the day of Archangel Michael, according to all biblical references. And I thought today would be a good day to continue the next part for status correction. And that we covered the first part being that you have to set yourself aside morally from their concepts of law. Law is a philosophy. And what you're being subjected to is a group of people who believe philosophically that you aren't allowed to have your jubilee. They think they're in charge of it because you are spiritless and you are a vacant vessel. And we'll go over all that. But the first step was what I discussed before, in that you have to be morally opposed and find a need, a desire, a reason to set yourself aside. You go into these forums and you're like, this makes no sense. I don't morally agree with what you're doing. Or you see your state, your governance, doing things that you're morally opposed to. And you have a right to complain about that. And that is embedded within the principal founding documents of our governance, of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Preamble, the Judiciary Act, all those things. So those are all inherent, that you have the right to go into the forums of state and say, hey, I don't agree with you. And if I'm morally opposed to it, I really don't have to agree with them. And that is where their rights stop and yours begin. And that's the significance of establishing a moral boundary. Because that's really what this is. This is the difference between legal and law is a moral difference. You differ from the states of men in contract, in commerce, because you're morally opposed to what they're doing in those forums and those paradigms. So what I want to discuss is a couple words. First off, I'm going to introduce you to some law terms. And one of the things that came up is presumption. And so I want to talk about presumption first, because people are talking about you have to overcome presumption and stuff like that, which is true. And I'm going to, so a short definition of presumption, because this is from Black's 1968 edition, I believe. Let me see if I can find the. Yes, it's the Black's 1968 4th edition, revised. And so I have a variety of law books, law dictionaries, and law books that have definitions. And I suggest that you always cite multiple things and check over whatever variety you can. I wouldn't take just one source for any word meaning in law or legal, as they're torrent all the time. But you can get a good overviewing idea of what a definition means by reading a couple sources. So in this source, I'm going to use this, though this definition is almost 2 pages, but I'm just reading the beginning of it. So presumption, according to Black's Law 4th, is presumption of fact. Okay, so the presumption relates to facts upon the bar. An inference, affirmative or disaffirmative, of the truth or falsehood of any proposition or fact drawn by the process of probable reasoning in the absence of actual certainty of its truth or falsehood, or until such certainty can be ascertained. So presumption is, we're going to walk in here thinking that you're dead beyond the sea. Okay? And that's the biggest issue with the problem with people only using papers or particulars to think that they are achieving status correction, because there's the presumption that you're dead beyond the sea. So any instrument you create is not really deemed anything. I mean, you have to overcome the presumption of not being dead spiritually before anything that you bring forth. So if you walk in there and go, look, I have all the papers, it means nothing if you don't have the law, the philosophy of the law behind it. So because you have to parse, I'm over here in the law of God versus I'm over here in contract. So if all you're bringing is contract stuff and paperwork that may or may not be properly filled out because you don't quite understand law yet, but you filled out all the proper paperwork, it achieves nothing. They have to be paired together. And here's why. Because what you're in is you're under what's called a fictio. Okay, now a fictio is another definition I'd like to bring forth, and it is in Roman law. So a fictio, and this is also from Black's 4th. You will not find it in newer ones. These are old terms. They've pulled them out because they don't want you to know what they're doing. So this is a fictio. It says, in Roman law, a fiction, an assumption or supposition of the law. Fictio, quote. In the old Roman law was properly a term of pleading. So you're in fictio, okay? And signified a false averment on the part of the plaintiff, which the defendant was not allowed to traverse. Does that sound like a presumption? So you walk in, they plead in fictio, okay? And as that the plaintiff, and this is an example, this is in Roman law, what fictio means. As that the plaintiff was a Roman citizen, when in truth he was a foreigner. The object of the fiction was to give the court jurisdiction. So, you walk into one of their forums, and the state of Ohio, in the mask of state, that guy over there, is pleading in fictio. And the judge, the law, the state of law, up on the bench there, he is in fictio too. And they all are in the presumption that you are a Roman citizen, when in fact you aren't. So, if you read a fictio, the purpose of the fictio is to give them jurisdiction. Not only that, but it's to present a presumption that you can never overcome by pleading in the manner that they brought you forth. So that is the first thing you need to understand, is it is always a presumption that you are a Roman citizen, even though you aren't, and that you're a foreigner. And it's always the presumption that you are dead beyond the sea, and you are a soulless person in a vacant vessel, and that they can go capture under admiralty law. So there's all these presumptions. And if you walk into their paradox, okay, so if you walk into the presumption that you are something that you aren't, and the inherent design of the system is to not allow you to overcome that presumption, you can never win by arguing in their particulars. And that is the point. So when I say you have to walk in and say, I'm morally offended, it's because there's three things that are required for them to acquire after the presumption jurisdiction. They have to have subject matter jurisdiction, venue jurisdiction, and personal jurisdiction. So they have to have all three of those things to actually be, quote, your judge. If you give them personal jurisdiction by, let's say, walking in to what people would call pro se, okay, now there's been a discussion about pro se versus pro per. So let me explain to you what's pro se. Pro se, okay, pro se, this is from Black's 6. Yeah, mine, that's the bicentennial, or the centennial edition, not bicentennial edition. It says pro se, for one's own behalf, in person, appearing for oneself, as in the case of one who does not retain a lawyer and appears for oneself in court. Okay, if you appear for oneself in court, and you walk into a fictio, it's already presumed that you don't have any rights. You can't appear for the self that they're already saying is something that you're not, in a manner that doesn't allow you to overcome that. So if you walk in pro se, you are accepting jurisdiction. You're accepting their presumption that you are a Roman citizen. And you will never be able to overcome that presumption, that fictio in law, okay? So you have to go in as a in propria persona. Notice it's not in pro se, okay? It's not a pleading. In pro se just means I'm here as a guy, you know. I'm taking on the act of an attorney, but you accept the jurisdiction of the court. Now, versus in propria persona, okay? So in propria personam, okay, it says in one's own proper person, okay? The proper standing. You're in the proper standing. So if you say I'm in propria personam, and you say I'm standing in the law as the real flesh and blood man, morally opposed to you, you automatically have challenged jurisdiction, and you can then overcome that presumption that has been laid against you in fictio, okay? These are all philosophical concepts and arguments and paradigms. You're in an argument of philosophy. And if you don't understand the foundations and the rules of the philosophy and the presumptions, you're not going to win. So let me finish reading the in propria personam. It was formerly a rule in pleading that pleas to the jurisdiction of the court must be pled in propria personam, because if pleading by attorney, they admit the jurisdiction. As an attorney is an officer of the court, and he is presumed to plead after having obtained leave, which admits the jurisdiction. So, guess what he's leaving? He's asking to leave your rights. I hate to say that, but so pro se, you're walking in just as an attorney, and you're accepting jurisdiction. You're just, I didn't get an attorney. I'm going to be my own attorney, whatever. In propria personam, you are literally operating under the proper person, propria, the selfdom, not self. So pro se is mask of self, me. Propria personam, in propria, in the pleading of, you're in the mask of self-dom. You are actually coming with equal standing as the mask of state. And that's why attorneys and judges and forums, they don't want you in proprietary persona. In fact, they don't even say it exists. Well, it clearly exists. It's in a law book. So, and it's in a law book to tell you that there is a pleading, a way to come into a fictio and argue against the jurisdiction and the presumption. Because if you accept the jurisdiction in pro se, then the jurisdiction is you're a Roman citizen and you're going to stay there. I don't care what you bring to me. I don't care what paperwork you bring to me. You are a Roman citizen even though you are a foreigner. Because we are occupying your lands and we are managing them on behalf of Roman civil law. So you're a thing. So pro se does nothing. Okay, it accepts jurisdiction, and you are stuck in their fictio, and you will never overcome presumption. They might act like you're overcoming something. That's just to make you feel better. You will never gain your jubilee. You will never have 100% access to your sus decay trust. It won't happen. The only way to argue outside of the paradigm, or the paradigm you're in, is to operate outside the paradox and say, I am not part of your fictio. I am coming as the mask of selfdom, arguing against your jurisdiction and challenging your jurisdiction. As I said, they have to have 3. Venue, subject matter, personal. Okay. Venue, they have because they're there. The seats of government have been vacant, and they have put corporate entities, banks, private banks, municipal corporations, unlawfully state franchised corporations, because if you've watched the municipal corporations one, you realize that the right to franchise was left to the legislature. Well, the legislatures don't do corporate charters anymore. The Secretary of State does. So he's unlawfully taken over, well, in de facto, taken over the position of operating for the legislature to franchise corporations, municipal and otherwise. So they've just put corporations in the seat, the C's of the de jure instruments. The court of this, the court of that. Those are corporations sitting in the lawful created seat that has a grant of law to be a court of law. They are corporations operating within the seats, obfuscating the real instruments, operating in Roman civil law commerce. Okay? So you're not dealing with the lawful institutions. You're operating in contract law. Well, if you walk into a corporation, a private bank, and they assume that you are a property of theirs and a Roman citizen and you're not, and you just walk in and go, well, I'm just going to argue this, and I'm not going to challenge jurisdiction, it's not going to happen. So they automatically have venue jurisdiction in their mind because we're here. Nobody else is here. We're the only game. We're the monopoly. We have venue because they are operating in the name. If you look at certain things, like there's a big obfuscation of the district courts of the United States and the United States district courts. Where in the federal regs, they literally said, we are now going to change the name from the district courts of the United States to the United States district courts. They literally obfuscated and have torn the names of those courts to make it look like they're those courts. In the state of Ohio, you have the Supreme Court for the state of Ohio. Well, in the Constitution, it's the Ohio Supreme Court. So they are a corporation operating within the seat of a grant of law with a name similar sound and function, okay, implied function as the real grant of law court. But they're not that court. They're a corporation operating in the seat, the lawful seat of that court. Okay, so they're just an administrative forum. They're not a court. They become a court when they get those 3 things. So they automatically have venue in their mind because we're the only game in town. There's no other Supreme Court. We're it. We're going to take venue. And you give it to them because you don't realize that they're just a corporation operating in the name of similar. Basically, it's trademark and service mark violations. They have stolen our service marks and trademarks and the names of lawful institutions, and they're operating in deception in their seats. So they have venue. Now, subject matter is, well, you're all in contract, right? They're the contract law keepers. They're the Roman overseeing administrative authority governing all contracts because the law is vacant. Seats are vacant. So they take subject matter Because most of the time you're sitting there arguing about the instrument estate, which they are agents of. So they have subject matter jurisdiction because you're coming to them with issues and contract against a state agency, a municipality, a county, a corporately franchised business that they technically, in law standards, own the franchise of. So all corporations are owned by the prevailing state because you went and you registered your corporation with them, which means you put them under your jurisdiction. And they can attach you and control that instrument because you registered it with them, and they are the administrators of everything they register. So they got subject matter, right? Even though your corporate fiction, your all capital name, your straw man was created against your will, and it's a quasi-contract, an ultra-virus one, it still exists. And that contract is in their jurisdiction. They created it. They created their capacity to claim that as their subject matter. So they've got venue and subject matter. You can't get over those until certain things happen in the law and or common law courts come back, and there's a different venue to go to. So you are automatically they already have you in 2 of the 3 things they need. So the only thing you can challenge is personal jurisdiction. Now, personal jurisdiction is acquired by 2 acts, assent and consent. Assent is when you just do something. And most people give them assent the minute you walk into a municipal court and the judge goes, the administrator goes, take off your hat. And you just take your hat off. That's assent. Do you realize that when you do that you gave that administrator jurisdiction over you? It's that simple. It's kind of like when you tell your kids, stop being so loud. And you stop being so loud. Who's the boss? Who's the dad? Who's the parent? So when you walk into a court and they tell you, take off your hat, stop chewing gum, shut your phones off, you can only plead these 3 things. Innocent, guilty, not innocent. Guilty, not guilty, no contest. There's far more pleadings than that, but they're telling you can only plead those 3. And you accept that those are the only 3 pleadings you can have. Guess what? When you accepted their rules, you put them to be, you're in their personal jurisdiction. You have agreed to their principal presumptions of the argument. So when you go into these forums and you operate and accept their fictio presumptions, you're never going to win. You automatically give them the personal jurisdiction. Okay? The other one is consent. Okay? Consent is an act of reason, where you reasoned to do something. Like, as I said, you're only allowed 3 pleadings. Not guilty, guilty. I keep saying innocent because that's what everyone should say, but they tell you that's not a pleading. But pleading innocent is a plead. They just will argue with you and say that you can't do that. You have to say not guilty. Well, not guilty is a presumption that there was a guilt to begin with, that they had standing. When you plead innocent, you're saying there's a whole bunch of stuff under innocent that is not being afforded to you when you plead not guilty. So when you accept that you can only have 3 pleadings, no contest, guilty, not guilty, that is consent, because you've reasoned, surely there's more pleadings than that. And there are. There's in propria persona, we just saw that. There's in fictio, which they're in, and they're not telling you. So there's all these pleadings that that are there, but you choose not to go find the law, and you choose to accept their rules, and you reason, and so you go, I'm not guilty. That's consent. So when you accept the presumptions of the court, the forum, from the administrator, the judge, the magistrate, when you accept the parameters, the rules, those that box they put you in, when you accept that, you accept their jurisdiction. So, going in pro se, you accept their jurisdiction. Accepting there's only 3 types of pleading, you accept their jurisdiction. When you don't challenge jurisdiction, you accept their jurisdiction. And there's only a couple ways to challenge jurisdiction. First is by coming in propria personam, in law, under law, common law, in the law. They're at law. Again, they're at law. They're attorneys at law. They twist at law. They're not in law. So when you walk in and say, I'm under common law, I'm in common law, and I'm pleading in propria personam, and I'm challenging your jurisdiction, and that's a demurrer, and we're going to get to that. So I wanted to make sure that you all know, because what you have is they are considering you in rem. Okay, so as I've said, you're deemed dead. You're deemed a vacant flesh, a vacated vessel. That your soul, because you are in Rebellion clearly is insane. You're just an empty, soulless vessel walking around. And because it's just the flesh, the actions are in rem. And I wanted to explain that. So in rem is a technical term used to designate proceedings or actions instituted against the thing, in contradistinction to personal actions which are said to be in personam. Again, in propria persona, meaning I am the man coming forward challenging as the mask of selfdom in proper person, as living flesh and blood, arguing against your presumption in fictio. Okay? That's what you have to achieve. So if you don't even understand the paradigm of how they've caught you in their fictio, you'll never overcome that presumption. Okay? So we're talking about in propria personam versus in pro se, in fictio, okay? And what that creates when you accept in fictio is what's called a legal fiction, or a fiction in law. Now, a legal fiction, okay, is, let's read that. Assumption of fact made by court as biased for deciding a legal question, a situation contrived by the law to permit a court to dispose of a matter, though it need not be created improperly. Fiction, example is fiction of loss grant as basis for title by adverse possession. So, when you accept the fictio, you accept that you're a fiction of law, okay? And a fiction of law, something is, again, this is from Black's fourth, that says a fiction of law, something known to be false is assumed to be true. Well, in the greater one, in the 6th edition I just read you, it says that it's something the court is allowed to do to solve the matter. So, in the 4th edition of Black's, it tells you that a fiction in law, which is created by their presumption of the fictio, coming in fictio in pleading, the state comes in fictio, and says, this guy's a Roman citizen. Even though you're not, you're a foreigner. Okay, actually, they're the foreigner, you're the native. But they're acting like you're the foreigner. You're on their land. So, he's saying he's in fictio, you're a fiction in law. The judge operates and creates a fiction in law, which in the 4th says something known to be false is assumed to be true. Sound like a fictio? You're presumed to be a citizen of Rome, but you're not. Okay? And then in the 6th it says that a fiction in law is something that the judge is allowed to do in order to resolve the issue. So he's resolving the issue by putting you somewhere that is totally false. They know it's false. You have to prove it's false. You have to challenge that third thing, the personal jurisdiction, because they already have the presumption of venue and subject matter, and the only thing left you is to bring forth yourself as the resurrected living man to challenge their jurisdiction, not for self. You have to challenge the jurisdiction for all men and women and things. You have to challenge it in the mask of selfdom and say, hey, state, because they come as state. So if you go in and they're the mask of state and you come in as a lowly man, you're uneven, which is not allowed in law, by the way. What's afforded to the plaintiff has to be afforded to the defendant. They don't ever do that. So you have to walk in and make them do it. You have to say, if he's the mask of state, I'm the mask of the man. I'm the mask of selfdom. I'm the mask of all men. And I say, you don't have jurisdiction over me. Prove your personal jurisdiction. Okay? Prove personal jurisdiction. And that is the only way to overcome the first thing that you have to do when you walk into a farm, and that is to overcome the fictio, which is the presumption of jurisdiction over you because you're a vacant, soulless vessel of flesh, that they own the land, so they get the body. You have to overcome the presumption that you're not there, that you are not a thing, because they're operating in rem, in the law of things. Okay? So the way to do that is to demur. So we're going to go over a demur, because a demur is your right under the Constitution. It's part of due process. If the plaintiff is supposed to define all of these jurisdictions, why he has venue, why he has subject matter, and how he's acquired personal. Now, they don't challenge that. That's why they want you to get an attorney and a torner, so that the two attorneys can just kind of skip that necessity and operate under the fictio, the presumption that they don't have to satisfy any of those. But in law, they do. And there are a variety, I believe there are 7 things that they have to achieve in order to get personal jurisdiction. Okay? They never create those, and they never put them on the record. But if you challenge personal jurisdiction, if that administrator and that plaintiff collude to go forward in the act without establishing jurisdiction on the record, that's a crime. One, that's considered a treasonous act, and two, you object when they move forward, and you've preserved your right because they're not operating in law. Then they're operating in their own little private contract and denying you due process, because under due process they have to establish. Okay, it says a jurisdiction previously established in that amendment under due process. That personal jurisdiction has to have been previously established for them to move forward. So you will demur. And the definition of a demur, this particular one that I got, and I'll pull it from a couple places, but this is from Webster's New Webster's Dictionary from 1981. And people don't realize that Webster was an attorney. So he loved the definitions of words. And in this particular book, it actually has a section that's something like 80 pages that's called The Law of the Layman. And it's got this really great stuff in it. I don't own the book. A friend of mine let me borrow it to copy it, a notarized copy. So I'm pulling from this, from the copies. And the term demur, okay? A demur is to object because of scruples, okay? So an exception taking, objection stated, okay? So a demur is, that's to D-E-M-U-R. So the act, okay, verb infinitive, to demur, means to object because of scruples, morality, okay? That's why you have to have your moral code and compass there, okay? Because you have to object because of scruples and morality. Now, demurrer, that's the act, the noun, okay? One who demurs, law, a pleading which claims that the contentions submitted by the opposing parties are insufficient in law to warrant his justification in bringing an action, a demur. So it's a challenge to standing, it's a challenge to jurisdiction, it's a challenge to his character. Who is this guy? I mean, it's basically like, pardon my French, it was like, who the fuck are you? Who are you? Who is this judge? Who is this guy? How do I owe the state of Ohio a corporate fiction who can't operate in anything other than things? Because only things can bring actions against things. That's why they made you a thing, so they can bring an action against a thing. Because a thing can't bring an action against a man. Because, again, what is owed to the plaintiff must be owed to the defendant. And you can't put a corporate entity in prison, can you? You can put the man who is sitting in the seat operating under the color of law. You can put him in prison. So how does a thing, a corporate fiction, bring an action in law against a man, and put a man in prison when a thing can't be in prison? See, they can only bring trespasses. The reason why they're allowed to bring the, quote, criminality is because they're seizing your flesh, okay? So they're seizing their asset. That's how they get around it. But you literally are characterized as a thing. That's the whole point of the straw man, is it makes you a thing. So that in rem, the thing, the state of Ohio, a corporate fiction, a legal fiction operating in fictio with that guy, can say, we can take this thing, the flesh, that is empty of morality as we define it, and we're going to take our vessel back until this spirit that's in it starts behaving the way we think it should within the things that we own, the land. So it confiscates your flesh. It doesn't recognize the soul within unless you make it. Again, bring the demur, because corporations don't have scruples, do they? Things don't have scruples. Things don't have morality. So the reason why the first step to status correction is to define yourself as a morally bound, flesh and blood, righteous, talking, acting, speaking man and woman is because things don't do that. And so if you define yourself that way and bring that, you automatically are not a thing. So then you come in and you demur as not a thing and say, I'm offended by what you've claimed I've done, or that I owe him, or that you're my Elohim, Mr. Magi on the bench. I'm morally opposed to that. So you demur. And the key with a demur, though, is this. The key with a demur is when you demur in law, you're actually accepting the facts. If they say, you beat up that cop. Okay, well, I beat up a cop, but the cop was assaulting me first. So you demur because you go, hey, fine, I accept the facts. argue. I'm not even going to argue that I didn't beat the cop up. What I'm going to argue is that that cop assaulted me, and I had every right because he was unlawfully arresting me, or he was unlawfully operating outside the law, under the color of law, and pursuant to the law, since he was assaulting me without cause or warrant, and had no standing to put a gun in my face. I had every right to assault him back. See, those are the arguments. You have to supersede the greater law. So when you demur, just know that you're accepting the facts of the claim. You were speeding. Okay, demur. Show me how I owe you money because I'm traveling the land at 3 miles over the speed limit that's posted by an arbitrary corporate fiction, and I wasn't harming anybody. And that's really kind of the argument. But you have to accept those facts. So demur. Now, the interesting thing about this is when you look into demur, in all states, any state who says you don't have the right to demur, they're violating the law. It took me 3 years to the Supreme Court here in Ohio. The statutes afford someone the right to demur, which is a challenge to jurisdiction. If you look in the statutes, a demur is a challenge to jurisdiction. Not only the standing of the plaintiff, it's a challenge to the jurisdiction of the court itself to impose the fictio upon you. So you challenge the jurisdiction, right? So when you do that and you set yourself aside, it brings about, so it's satisfied in statute, right? But the Supreme Court in Ohio, the Supreme Court for the state of Ohio, not the Ohio Supreme Court. So the entity of corporate business operating in the seat of the Ohio Supreme Court, the grant of law court, that has a name similar form and implied function as the court of law, the corporate entity, the state of Ohio, the Supreme Court for the state of Ohio is a corporation. They abolished demurs and told all of their corporate fiction courts, administrative forums, to not accept a demur. Well, the legislature said you had the right to it. So it took a 69-page chastisement and bringing forth the law in a common law format, meaning by letter, notice, affidavit, to them as a body saying, you can't abolish demurs. It's a violation of separation of powers because the legislature says I can do it. So you can't abolish demurs. And guess what? They're not abolished in Ohio anymore because they have to let people demur. So they have to let you challenge the jurisdiction. So if you are from some other state of being, state of Ohio, in corporate action, and they tell you you can't challenge the jurisdiction and you can't demur because that is the law term, demur. If you can't challenge the standing of the plaintiff and the jurisdiction of the forum, then they are clearly operating outside the law. And that is a violation of separation of powers and a denial of due process because you have the right to challenge their exercise of personal jurisdiction of you. I've used the Sharia law courts as an example before, and that's really what's happening in that respect because they're held to a different moral code. So how can the corporate fiction, civil law, impose its will on someone who has a clear defined law themselves in Sharia law, even though it's totally... some of their tenets are completely against the law of the land, and those will have to be corrected because you don't get to operate in any form of law that doesn't comply with the highest law of the land, and the 3 tenets. So in Sharia law, if it violates public peace, violates public trust, or harms people, it's against the law. I don't care if that's your religion. You don't get to exercise that here. But the point of the fact is that they're coming and saying, we have a moral code that we live by. You don't have personal jurisdiction over us. You're not our Elohim. And guess what? They're saying, hey, you're right. So why aren't you guys going in there saying, hey, I'm a Christian. I don't comply with your moral code. Where's my Christian court? And you should do that. And the Christian court's the common law court. Because that's what they're doing with the Sharia. People are all confused about this. Well, how is this happening? Because they're challenging their personal jurisdiction over them. They're saying we're morally offended by the scruples of your jurisdiction. We don't abide by it. We're not gonna. That is morally reprehensible to us, even though that we disagree with their particular moral code. And as I said, their moral scruples allow children and things to be harmed. That's not going to fly here. So whoever thinks that's going to fly under Sharia, you're sadly misguided because the law here is very clear on those 3 things. But even still, they have a right, as anyone does, just like the Amish. They have their own codes. They have their own courts. And those people subject themselves to that personal jurisdiction. So you go in and you're morally offended. You demur. Well, the interesting thing about that is there's a term called demurrage. Okay. Now, demurrage is an admiralty term. Demurrage is the detention of a vessel by a freighter, as in loading or unloading beyond the time agreed upon, similar detention of a freight train or truck, a charge for such detention. So, if I'm a boat owner and I go and I dock, I'm at the docket, and you hold I dock, and the wharfage dude is supposed to take my product off my boat. And he forces me to be anchored and doesn't release me because the bill of lading hasn't been signed. And he doesn't release me, and he holds me at the dock for longer than he should, getting my product. I am in demurrage, and I can charge him demurrage. You can charge damages for demurrage, which is the holding of the vessel, impeding the vessel owner's travel to go make more commerce. So when you bring in the term demur, which is a challenge to the standing and jurisdiction, you're coming in as a vessel saying, why are you holding my vessel? Why are you, which is admiralty law. So you know, if you can go in and demur, and there's such an admiralty fee and fine as demurrage, there's also a fine for wharfage, okay? And keelage, if you damage the keel, it's insurance on the keel. So these are all admiralty terms that if you understand them enough, you can bring claims in equity for demurrage, wharfage, and keelage for them holding your vessel and not allowing you to run about freely. So the fact that the term demur exists, and it is rooted in, and on top of that, you have an admiralty term for the fines that is laid to the dock holder or the wharf manager for holding your vessel and preventing you from free contract. That tells you that you're in admiralty law, because guess what? You are put on the dock. So when you walk in, the vessel of your soul, you're in the bar. Some people argue what the bar is, but a lot of people say that the bar is the sandbar, because in admiralty law, the sandbar is owned by none. And there's a lot of treaties that were actually formed on the sandbars, where there is no jurisdiction. And so the treaty can be governed in and of itself. The people who bring forth the treaty make their own law, because there's no jurisdictional law underneath the land. So a sandbar, since it's an ever-moving land, the bar, a lot of people, is what they consider at bar, meaning we're bringing this argument into a neutral jurisdiction where no one has superior standing and there's no other underlying law that we have to conform to necessarily. And it's really funny, because a friend of mine says that everything's in the movies, and when I watch Pirates of the Caribbean with Johnny Depp, there's so much stuff in there like "arr." I mean, that's ARR. It says, "May I parlay?" You know, these are all admiralty terms that they're trying to express to you. They have the argument on the sandbar when they're all running around, and the treasure's on the sandbar, and there's all these people. The reason why they can argue it is because no one owns the sandbar. So it's the prize, it's capture, it's prize law. So they've put you on the bar, you're at bar, and you're docked, your vessel is docked, and you're being held in demur. But you don't even say, well, I'm in demur, but I challenge him and I challenge him. So demur is a very important term because it challenges the jurisdiction. It challenges the presumptions. So the interesting thing about that is that another thing that we talked about, because it's clear now, it should be clear now that they're operating, okay, as if you are a empty vessel, that there is no soul in it, that the cargo is lost, it's abandoned because you've abandoned your God. When you abandon your morality, you abandon the cargo, which is the soul within it. So your soul's abandoned, your spirit's abandoned because you have no God, you have no morality, you've made the state your God. A man-made state. You've made a fiction and law your God. You're clearly delusional. You're insane. Therefore, we're going to confiscate the vessel. We're going to take the vessel, your body, and put it on dock. There's nothing to empty. We're just going to hold it there. And it's a capture of prize, because in admiralty law, if I find a boat, okay, out on the sea, and there's no captain, there's no spirit, and there's no captain, and there's no crew, and they're all dead or whatever, I can go and I can tow that boat in, and it's mine. It's called prize law. It's called the law of capture. If stuff washes up on the sand, and it's let's say a boat crashed on the reef, and all of its product washes up on the shore. Well, if you go and you recover that yourself and you invest time, okay, that's prize as well, because you've maintained it, you've secured it, you've added to the value of it or prevented it from being diminished in value, and that gives you a right to the title of that product. Now, if the guy who owned the boat is sitting on the beach going, "That's my stuff, that's my stuff, here's the bill of lading," it's a different story. But if you find stuff coming in from the ocean and it washes ashore from a shipwreck, pursuant to common law, and there's case law on that, if you pick up those bales of cotton and you take them and you keep them from being destroyed, and you preserve their value, they're yours by prize law. Same with boats. So you are a vessel. This is the vessel of your soul, and you're being deemed vacant of any, there's no product in there, there's no spirit, there's no soul, there's nothing to unload. We just found this body floating about being mindless, soulless, godless, and we're going to bring it in, and we're going to prize law it, and we're going to impose our morality upon it, because it doesn't have any. So we're imposing the morality of state under the presumption that you're under our jurisdiction, and that guy over there has a superior standing of state, and he has the standing to bring a claim against you because you're a thing, because you got no spirit, you got no soul. So that's a clear. If you look at the terms, you can see where they're getting the admiralty in rem jurisdiction, because you are a vessel. This flesh is a vessel of your soul. And in their mind, they own all the land. They don't own your spirit. They don't own your morality. They don't own your soul. They want it. They really do want your soul. They capture the vessel to get the soul. They capture the vessel to make you weary and to deny God. Because once you deny God, man, you're theirs. You're theirs. Your soul's theirs. Your vessel is theirs. Everything's theirs. They got you. And so. And this is something else I want to bring up that proves that they are actually in admiralty. And this is the American Admiralty, Jurisdiction and Practices. And it's the Benedictine by Erastus C. Benedict. And it's the first edition. They call it the Benedictine. Now, good luck finding this book. This book is usually only found at Supreme Court justices' offices. The Chief Justice will have one. Attorneys don't even get to see this book, and because it's too revealing. And this is clause... That's what section I'm in here. But it's subsection 19. I want to see what clause I'm in, so I can give you the clause. If I don't find it really quickly. Chapter 11, subsection 19. And this is the law. This is their law in admiralty. Okay? The Constitution, so this is chapter 11 of the Benedictine, first edition, subsection 19. It says, the Constitution of the United States grants the federal government jurisdictional power, quote, all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. This is the whole of the grant of that branch of judicial power, and brief and simple as it is, upon its true constructs depends the whole of the American admiralty jurisdiction. It has received 5 different constructions. So then they talk about constructions. But the fact of the matter is this book is affirming that the federal jurisdiction is only in admiralty and maritime. They have no jurisdiction in law. The jurisdictions in law and equity were given to the county common laws. Okay, and even now, with the forced municipal corporation being what holds you against your will as a citizen of a corporate franchise, that's still common governance and rule. So, though the counties are kind of vacant and they don't have the sheriffs and the common law, they've been given the municipal powers are really who have the first claim over you in probate, because that's the only place where you are forcibly made to be a municipal citizen. So that's why someone wrote me an email, well, why is the DOD settling an issue in Baltimore or Boston or something like that? And I said, well, it's a municipal corporation, and they have the original claim in Replevin over whatever property was in there. They have priority claim because that's where the flesh and blood, man and woman, are forced into the corporate fiction, the civil fiction, the Roman civil law in that municipal corporation. So the federal, when we talk about child trafficking, you have the encroachment of the admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, because Title IV, subsection E, pays these states to bring these children, their flesh in, to confiscate under prize law. Well, the parents have abandoned the child. So it's the same as if it's a boat out on the ocean. They have to prove abandonment in order to unlawfully transfer the product. They transfer the property of the child out of the parent who's abandoned them. And that's always a claim, is that the parents have abandoned the child. So it's an abandoned vessel, and they go and confiscate it, or it's a damaged vessel. It's being damaged. The usufruct's being damaged. You're harming the vessel, and the vessel does not really belong to the parent. It belongs to the state. It doesn't even belong to God in their mind. It belongs to their made-up God, the state, that they control. Okay? That's why they like the concepts of state. They can control the God that talks to you. They can change his will, its will, all the time, and change what God says you can do and change what God says you can't do. So state is a substitute for morality and God. So you've abandoned the child, or parents abandoned the child, and they go seize it by capture. And they pay the states, which is why it's an encroachment of admiralty upon the land. The federal jurisdiction and the Code recreated corporate federal jurisdiction, with its only grant of law being admiralty and maritime, is paying the states to go get the vessel and bring it to them. But that's still an encroachment of admiralty upon the land. Okay, that's vice admiralty. It's prize law. It's piracy. But I'm trying to explain to you how you're a vessel and there's a soul, and they think you're a vessel at sea, and that they own everything that's of flesh, and they thing. And so that's the significance of coming back and saying, I am not a thing. I have morality. I have a belief system, which I find, which is in complete contradistinction to your belief systems, and I find it scrupulously repugnant. Okay, so that is very, very significant, and that's the significance of propria persona versus pro se. And you'll know that. Look at the courts. They don't even recognize that propria persona exists, because that allows you to walk in and challenge their fictio, and they're screwed because they got nothing after that. They got nothing. There's nothing that proves them to have a grant of law. If you come get my 13th writ of conspiracy on the 13th Amendment, that especially proves that they don't have a grant of law, that they're operating in utter fictio. Okay, and it just they're de facto. They're lying to you. They're deceiving you to try to exercise an encroachment of the admiralty, maritime, the vice admiralty, law of piracy upon the people, to go get babies and to go get your titles of your lodial land, to get all this stuff. Admiralty has no jurisdiction on land. Those would be considered auxiliary maritime claims. And guess what? Pursuant to the law, auxiliary maritime claims are bound by the common law, because it's on land. It's an act of land, even a boat. Okay, so let's say I go find a boat out at sea and I pull it into the dock. And I said, hey, look at the boat I found. The guy goes, really? We have a claim on this. It's sitting, the wharf guy's got it. You got to go, he'll probably pay you. He'll pay you the reward for bringing it in and the towage and stuff like that. You can get that. But if someone's got a claim on it, it's bound by the common law. And then that goes to, guess what? A court in common law, where they argue who has proper title. Does he have title because he found it at sea? Oh, not really. Not if there's already a claim on it. It's not his property. But is he owed a reward? Is he owed what it cost him to bring that back? Should you give him a finder's fee? Yeah. Okay. But still, because what you can do is, if you're really an unscrupulous guy, you could go out to sea, kill the captain, create a mutiny, kill all of the sailors on it, throw them overboard, and then tow it back and say, look, I found a boat. That's why those are crimes. Even in the sea, crimes against the flesh are bound by the common law. And where I'm going to tell you that you have the right to propria persona, I mentioned this in one of my comments, is under the Judiciary Act of 1789, and this is in section 22. And let me see if I can cite, and I can bring that up. It says, I'll find the citation out, but it's section 22. It's actually page 35 if you actually have the book of it. And it says, the common law remedy save to suitors is the right to proceed in personam against the defendant, which remedy the common law is competent to give. So if the common law can give the remedy, it's always the first primary court that is supposed to be used, if you invoke it. But you have to walk in propria persona, in proper person, and invoke the jurisdiction of the common law. And in order to invoke the jurisdiction of the common law, you have to be someone living of the flesh with scruples and morality. You can't go in there as a thing with papers and argue that you have morality. Because slaves don't talk, things don't talk, corporate entities, corporate fictions don't talk. So, and they can't convey scruples. I don't know any, the CEO of a corporation may convey scruples, but a thing, which is a bunch of papers and corporate bylaws and registrations of corporate paperwork, that is not flesh and blood. Those are things. Those are corporate fictions. Just as the birth certificate, Social Security, and all those things, those create a corporate fiction of wealth. A corporate fiction for me is my corporate fiction. So the goal here is to go in and affirm yourself as not a thing, and start to exercise what they're doing. They're actually hypothecating, subrogating, and abrogating for your estate, the corporate self, okay, that they've created. They created a corporation for you. You're just not using it. They get to use it. But the problem is they're using it against us. They're using it against you to steal your estate, to defraud your estate and the trust. Okay. And I wanted to go over that real quick because that is an important aspect, because we're going to get to the sus decay here in a bit and the concepts of sus decay. Now, the whole aspect of sus decay is that a sus decay trust is created when the living flesh acts crazy and in mass operates in rebellion. One of the acts that we know that a lot of people are familiar with who look into sus decay trust is the sus decay Trust Act of 1666 in Britain. And when that happened, London was in rebellion. London was on fire, and this was all contrived. This was all made up stuff to get the people to act like crazy, much like in the Rodney King thing, which is what they're trying to do now. If they can talk you into rebelling, then they can confiscate all your land and say you're all crazy. Because since they consider themselves the vicar of Christ and the holder of the land for protections of the Jubilee and the usufruct, which is the global wealth. Usufruct is a collective trust that everyone that exists, quote unquote, on this earth has equal rights to. We don't own it, but we can control it. We can exercise our control over it. So they right now, because we're such immoral reprobates in their mind, compared to them, Satan worshipers that they are, literally, your prevailing religion is Satan worshipers. They've obfuscated that fact, but they are. They're baby sacrificing Satan worshipers. That's what Jesus was upset about, besides a variety of other things. So they were following Baal worship and Saturn. Saturn is in Satan worshiping. That's what the Roman polytheism does. They have brought forth this Satan worshiping immoral reprobate behavior. But they consider you reprobate because you don't believe like them. I don't know the quote. It says, one day men will run around who are crazy, grabbing men who are sane, saying, you are crazy because you don't think like me. Well, some saint said that. I should probably find that quote. It was an incredible quote to me because he was basically predicting today, where the people who are Satan worshipers who think you can do anything and live in chaos and abuse babies and steal things and treat men as merchandise, that they can do all these things, and they're saying that we're the ones that are vacant of spirit and soul, okay, that we don't have a moral compass. So they've basically made us... they say we're insane, that we are in rebellion. And since we're in rebellion, hurting each other, warring all the time, so that's why they have to perpetuate, and they create war, and they create iniquity, and they create bigotry and racism, and try to get blacks and whites to argue with each other and fight, and Muslims and Christians who have the same origins, hate to break it to people, but they have to get you to rebel against each other and to create the necessity for a sus decay. Well, there's also a sus decay in the Bible, and I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention because I know some of the Christians that have watched my biblical foundations of the American Common Law Republic really enjoyed that part. So I want to show you when I talked about claiming a right or putting a claim against the first sus decay that I read in the Bible, and I'll lend this to you. And this goes to show you how they created it, because you have to remember in the Bible it says multiple times that the crucifixion of Christ was to satisfy prophecy. When they tear his cloth, it says the Roman guard had to tear them into lots in order to satisfy prophecy, and then they send you to Psalms or whatever. It was a playbook. They were creating. This is a created paradigm. They made the plan. They set the plan in order, and they've gotten you all to just eat it up. And you don't even realize that you're following, your government is backed by and serving a very large Satan-worshipping cult. And that they think that they can do whatever they want with your land. And you're just here. You're wasting their space. You don't agree with them morally. And they're going to impose their ownership over you because you're a vessel lost at sea. You've abandoned spirituality. You're only consumed in the flesh, and they've created that paradigm. They said, here, just live in the flesh. The minute you do that, you're theirs. Okay, it's a Faustian pact. We give you the flesh, you eat the flesh, and your soul leaves, and then we get to say you're in rebellion and you're crazy, and we get to abrogate and hypothecate you. So back to the sus decay trust in the Bible. This is in Matthew. It's Matthew 27, and it's 1 through 10. I'll read the whole thing to you. Oh, and people, when I touch my books that are, this is almost 100 years old. I have 200-300 on your books. I touch them. These are magic books. You have to touch them. This is spells. This is magic. This is law. Okay? Whether you believe it or not, that's what they are. So let me read this, touching my book, and I respect it. It says, chapter 27, Christ delivered to Pilate. Okay? When the morning was come, all the chief priestesses and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priestess and elders, saying, I have sinned, and that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what is that to us? See thou to that. Meaning, why is that our problem? You're the one that defiled them. We paid you $30 to bring him to us, and then we did what we told you. We did what we wanted with him because you delivered him. Which some people believe that he was told by Jesus to do that. So I'm not trying to defame him in that respect. So, and he cast down, speaking of Judas, section 5, he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. And the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful for to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. Meaning those 30 silver pieces now were the value of the blood of Christ. Okay? And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then it was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them to the potter's field as the Lord appointed me. So, they took the 30 pieces of silver that Judas had been paid, and they threw back, because he believed that it was a fraudulent contract, and that they had lied to him and deceived him. Though it was their plan all along, because they were operating in prophecy. They had created a paradigm. So the best way to control something is to create every aspect of it, which is what the state tends to do. And they took that 30 silver pieces and they put it into a land trust. Okay? Because it couldn't be put back into the treasury. So, question is, we're not under gold anymore, because you can't put real land into the treasury if it's because it's been brought by the blood of innocents. Such as, after 2 world wars, all the countries were involved, and the whole world was considered being a belligerent and insane. And you can't take the money, okay, so they took all your money, and they put it into a vault, and they created, through the Federal Reserve Act, says, we're going to take all the money and create a fake instrument based on the value of that, with that assurity, the gold, the Federal Reserve note, okay. But the fact is the reason why they had to put it in the treasury, or in the land, and use the land as an estate, set aside sus decay, is because everyone had created a system, a situation where the blood of innocents was spilled. So every time you all go around damaging the blood of innocents, it gives them cause to take your land and your real physical self and put it into a trust. So after the Civil War, the reason why the American states of America united were put into trust is because of the same situation that it says in the Bible. You can't put money back into a treasury that is in conflict and rebellion. When the people don't have an agreement as to what should be done with the land or how it should be treated, all they can do is set that into a trust, a land trust. And that's what the Bureau of Land Management is. It's a land trust. If you look, the Bureau of Land Management is predominantly everything past the Louisiana Purchase because the government is in rebellion. The people are in rebellion. We've never set aside the Civil War. We've never resolved the Civil War. The people have never come forth and created a resolution, a peace treaty, and all we are is an armistice. We're just not fighting that way anymore. We're not fighting openly anymore. But it's been so far since they created this land trust and put our money in a sustake that people have forgotten why and how it happened. But the Bible tells you how it happens. The Bible says that when the people clamor for the blood of innocents, Jesus, whatever money that was placed upon the value of that man can no longer be put in treasury. It must be set aside in a trust, a land trust. And that's exactly what you are in, because your body is land. That's why they think they own you. Your bodies, by the bill of ladings, the birth certificates, and all those things, they have been made party to the land trust. That's why they control you. So you're in a vacant vessel. Your vessel's been put into a land trust, okay? But I'm going to tell you, here's the biggest part, and the Bible talks about this. The reason why I've claimed that I lay claim to this trust, because they sit and admit that the Pharisees, clamored for the death of an innocent man. It tells you in the Bible. That's what the Bible is telling you and witnessing, that an innocent man came forth who was morally opposed to what the prevailing government was doing. He walks into the temples and whips them out because they've made banks of the temples, temple courts. Okay, they're doing business in courts. If you look at the courts, there's pews in there. There's church pews. The guy up on the bench is wearing a Magi Pharisee's robe. I mean, it's all there, people. It's the same stuff. These are temple courts. But you're in the temple of Baal. You're in a Baal temple, going and paying tithe to Baal and Beelzebub and Satan. And the people exacting this don't even understand the religion and the morality that they're supporting by this Roman civil jurisdiction, which is about Satan worship. So you have to go in there and say, I'm morally opposed to your Satan worshiping. I mean, truly, you don't have to say it that way, but that's basically what you're doing. And saying, I don't abide by the fact that you think you own my flesh. And here's the one thing that gets both this sustake and every other sustake and the quasi-contracts and the ultra-virus contracts, because beautifully, this is the history of Congress. Okay, this is from the Annals of Congress. This is actually from the House of Representatives. I spend a great deal of time reading the public laws, and it's from, here's the title of the book, The Debates and Proceedings in the Congress of the United States, with an appendix containing important state papers and public documents and all the laws of a public nature, with a copious index. It's a really good book. And this one was printed in 1893. Now, this is from the 11th Congress, 1st and 2nd session, comprising the period from May 22nd, 1809 to May 1st, 1810 inclusive. Now, a good law library will have these, usually as one state. But again, a lot of people have gone about spending a significant amount of time destroying these records. But in this particular case, there's a variety of things in the 11th Congress. One, it talks about the right to remedy. There's a lot of things, that you have a right to remove yourself willfully from the corporate state or from any state, that you're not obligated by the principles of our founding documents to be compelled to support any state that you're morally opposed to. Okay, that's just the law. So that's another significance of why you have to understand your moral discontent with the prevailing state. Much as I said, the Sharia law people do. They go, you're not my morality. And they go, oh, well, you're kind of right. We can't impose that on you. We're going to have to let you have your own courts. That's the point. That's a precedent. So you guys should start going in there and going, I want my own court. I want a bunch of Christians judging me because I don't like your Satan worshiping stuff. Okay? Because that's what they are. They're not worshiping Jesus' tenet. They're not. They've absconded. So the Roman Catholic Church is basically Rome after they killed Christ. So they kill the prophet and then obfuscate and hide his tenets, take 18 books away and all this other stuff, and wrap themselves under his cloth, and then are still running around doing Satan worshiping and making you pay bail. Okay? It's still Roman civil law. Same stuff Jesus was dealing with. So here's the important part. This is on page 1920, or column 1920 is how it's done. And this is December 1809. And it's about more than halfway. It says, to make a contract binding, 5 things are necessary. This is in the Annals of Congress. It's an accepted statement of fact, and it gives citations. It says, 1, that the parties have power to consent. If you're being lied to, you can't consent. Fraud vitiates all contracts because you can't reason a contract if you're not told all the terms. And they're lying to you about who they are, what they're offering, what they expect of you. So, 2, that they have consented. So you have to consent. They have to get consent. This is the whole personal jurisdiction thing, because remember, you're in contract. So you have to be able to consent, which means they can't lie to you. You have to consent, truly consent, which means it has to be a learned, reasoned response. 3, that they have consented freely. Well, if they bring you in under chains and a gun, that's not consent. That's threat, duress, and coercion. That's not consent. 4, that the consent is mutual, meaning we both are in agreement. We both have given proper terms. We're operating in good faith. Okay? None of that happens down there. 5, that the execution is possible. Now, this is an important one. Now, I'm going to give you the citation. The citation in the Annals of Congress is VIDE, Vid Martin, VIDE, capital V, capital M, MARTEN, B, period, 2, comma, chapter 1, section 3. Okay? Now, the significance of that is that that the execution is possible. So tell me this, how are they executing states that they don't own? How's that possible? You know why? Because you've let them do it. You've let them do it. And this is one of those really cool things that I wanted to bring up real quick, if I can find it. And that is the rights of contracts. Okay? And this goes over, again, I'll see if I can find it. I may not be able to. But it talks about, this is that little section that I was telling you about in the New Webster's law. And it's called Layman's, here's the copy of it, Law for the Layman. It's a concise encyclopedia. And this was published in the back of Webster's New Dictionary, the deluxe encyclopedic edition. And what I'm trying to find is contracts. But basically it tells you what is a lawful contract and who can be contracted. And one of the biggest things is children cannot be contracted. So, you know, in the juvenile system, they waive the rights of the child. You know why they have to waive the rights of a child? Because you can't engage a child in contract. So they have to waive the rights of the child to define, to be a thing. They make it a thing because things can be contracted. If it was deemed as a child, a living flesh and blood child, then you couldn't contract with that. And then they would be actually stealing a child. But to them, they're not stealing a child. They're claiming in prize law a thing. So I don't seem to be able to find this, and I'll maybe bring it up in the next section. But what I'd like to say is that hopefully you all understand that the reason why you have to present yourself in morality is because you're being subjected to the morality of some not nice people in their Baal worshiping and the same things that Jesus was complaining against. The merchandising of men is one of the things that they have clearly done. They are totally 100% merchandising men because they're merchandising and bonding your flesh, the vessel of your soul. They are operating in admiralty jurisdiction in the states, which is an unlawful extension of the federal jurisdiction, and that's in de facto because that federal instrument was laid vacant and has been recreated in a corporate pyramid scheme by the states in franchising the United States Corporation Company in all of the states and territories. And those are all owned by attorneys, by the way, all those franchises. You don't know them. They didn't do them in your name. They have like, I saw one that was like 5 just random guys, who own the United States Corporation Company franchise in Florida. Okay, that's crazy. So you have to have the morality, and that this is actually a simple argument of their morality versus your morality. The state morality being godless, communist, Satan worshipers who don't want you to believe in the one true God and hold that higher law up there. And you have to understand that they consider your vessel of your flesh a vessel that they can claim through prize law and through abandonment. And when you abandon the flesh, as it says in the Bible, when the flesh is just flesh and there's no spirituality to it, it's an abandoned vessel in their mind. So you have to embody the spirit in the flesh in order to remove yourself from their fictio and to remove yourself being a thing. So I know that some people say, well, this doesn't really help me. Well, it does if you understand the greater construct. And I need you all to understand that this really is, law is the argument, the philosophy of what makes life better. As Aristotle says, we made, it's the state of being, the state of man. What am I? Then it's what are we? So it's a state of being, a state of self. Then it's the state of self-dom, the state of men. Then it's the states of men, different states together. And then it's the corporate, capital, states of men. So that's the evolution of the law, and the state of being and the states of men are in the higher law. The states that govern sovereignty of nations to nation and treaties, and then the corporate contract thing, those are in equity and in admiralty and maritime. But they all are bound by the common law because we start as a sovereign man or woman of divine origin within the flesh alive. And so you have to resurrect the morality and come forth with your morality, because if you walk into their Baal courts without holding the higher morality and saying, I'm not going to pay Baal to your Satan worshiping God, then you're going to lose and you're going to pay Baal. And you have to be willing, much like the Bible says, to walk through the fire and not fear treading with the lions, because they're going to threaten you. And again, if they put a gun to your face, it's not a lawful contract. If they're lying to you and don't tell you all the structure and all the content and the terms, again, that's not a lawful contract, because you can't give reasoned consent if you don't know what they're asking of you. So start going into these places and going, I'm confused. I don't believe in your morality. Who are you? I don't agree with this. Who died and made you my God? That's the question. So demurrage, fictio, fictions at law, demurrage. What makes a lawful contract? Morality, and how you're dealing with two different forms of morality. State as God, God being your God, being your God. So that's how to correct your status, to come from outside of the paradox and to step back into it in law and argue your position. You can't cannot run around in their particulars and win this argument. It is not designed to allow you. It is a paradox. If you ruminate only in the particulars, you will stay within the fictio, and you will never overcome the presumptions placed upon you, as they know, if they're enlightened at all in what the crimes are doing, they know that there's a presumption laid there that you can never overcome. I don't care how much you speak about paperwork, you have this and that. If you aren't embodying the morality of a resurrected spirit in the flesh, claiming the rights over your vessel that God gave you, that your God gave you, you're going to be trafficked as a thing, and your states are going to be attached, because that's the whole point. They just want to get you in there to write bonds and to attach your sus decay and to eat it away, to eat into that trust that was set aside for us. So that's my 2 cents for today. I should probably start calling it like coffee talk or something. But I love you all. I hope that this helps some people I will try to take the next step, which is a little more complicated, but I think I gave you a lot to think about today. And know that demure and demurrage, are admiralty terms. And all I'm trying to get you all to do is to stop being empty vessels floating around out there, completely consumed in the flesh, subject to the capture and the seizing by people with really, really, really bad morals and bad scruples that do some really heinous things to a lot of innocent people in this world. So I love you all. I hope that the rest of your Sunday is blessed. And despite the rain, I'm going to enjoy mine. So have a blessed Sunday. Peace be with you and all your relations. And I pray and hope that we all have enough.